Good evening and welcome, everyone. I'm Jason Bergdorfer. I'm a geography and geology professor and vice president of the Academic Senate here at College of the Canyon. The Academic Senate is a faculty organization whose primary role is to make recommendations to the Board of Trustees on academic and professional matters. Thus, we serve as the official voice of the faculty on these matters. The Academic Senate is fortunate to have opportunities to work with the District and College of the Canyons Foundation to sponsor important, inspirational academic events like the one planned for tonight. I would like to thank the Board of Trustees and administration of the college for their continued support of the scholarly presentation, a special event that highlights the individual expertise of our faculty. I would like to extend a special welcome to Dr. Buckley, Vice President of Instruction, and Joan McGregor, member of the Santa Clarita Community College District Board of Trustees. I would also like to thank College of the Canyons Foundation for their generous support of the scholarly presentation and extend a special welcome to Murray Wood, the Chief Development Officer of the COC Foundation. Now I'd like to provide you with some information on our presenters for this evening. Our first presenter, Kevin Anthony, is chair of the college's Hotel and Restaurant Management program, and he will take viewers on a virtual tour of Pompeii to explore the way of life of its residents. As a student at the University of Loyola Chicago, Rome Center of Liberal Arts, he spent his third year of college visiting Italy's major museums in Pompeii. He returned to America and completed his undergraduate degree at Loyola Marymount. After several years of working in the hotel industry, he began teaching classes on hotel management at UCLA School of Extension in Loyola Marymount. He received several grants to train and place low-income welfare recipients and homeless clients into the hotel industry. For his efforts in transitioning hard-to-serve clients into gainful employment, he received the Loyola Marymount Alumni of the Year Award for his service to the community. As a faculty member, he received the Scholarly Presentation Award for his documentary, Bodie, California, The Last Ghost Town. As a faculty co-lead, he has led 5 study abroad trips to Rome, Italy, and has been able to take students on field trips to Pompeii. He is also an avid hiker, and he reached the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. Our second presenter for the evening is Michael McCaffrey. He's the chair of the art department at the college. He will trace the origins of visual narrative in the creation of pictorial illusions in Western art back to ancient Pompeii through a detailed analysis of Roman-style wall paintings from the 1st century AD. He has traveled to Italy on several occasions. Rome is his favorite city in the world, and has visited the ruins of Pompeii 3 separate times. Originally from Glasgow, Scotland, McCaffrey completed his undergraduate studies at the Glasgow School of Art in Scotland and earned a master's in fine art degree from the University of Illinois after emigrating to the USA in 1991. He is also a practicing artist and has exhibited his paintings throughout the USA and the United Kingdom. When he is not in his studio or the classroom, you might find him hacking away on the links trying to lower his handicap. His Scottish roots never left him. All right. But before we begin tonight, I would like to bring out Dr. Sarah Etheridge. She's professor of anthropology and chair of the Scholarly Presentation Committee, and she has some more announcements to make for you guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. First, I would like to extend a very big thank you to David Stevenson, who is sitting right here. He was the chair of this committee for 18 years and did an amazing job, and I'm very honored to be entrusted now to take over as chair. I'd also like to thank our Chancellor, Dr. Van Hook. I'd like to thank the Board of Trustees and the Foundation for their support and for the awards for the presenters. I'd really like to extend a thank you to my committee for all of their hard work, their input, all of the meetings and the guidance that they give the presenters. In your programs, you can see all the past presentations that we've had. A couple of important announcements. Right after Professor McCaffrey is done with his presentation, please stay seated. We have a very short award ceremony where the presenters will get their awards. Students will get tickets of attendance after this award ceremony on your way out. There is no question and answer portion. We do have a small faculty and staff reception up in the lobby instead. Inside your program, students, you'll also see a handout of 10 questions. You can fill those in as the presenters are speaking, and you can use that as extra credit if your instructor has allowed that. And then also on your way out of the actual building, the Spring Student Symposium Committee will have a table. Students, you're here to see some amazing work by professors, but we do have an opportunity for students to present their own work in an academic situation, in an academic setting. And we have awards, scholarships available, so if you're interested in that at all, please take a flyer. That will be in April of 2019. I would like to go ahead and begin tonight and introduce to the stage Professor Kevin Anthony.
Thank you very much for coming tonight and letting me share something I've been very passionate about, and that's the city of Pompeii. Before we start, though, I just want to remind you that this presentation is going to have some adult content in it. It was not considered adult content back in Pompeii, it is today. So, what I'd like to talk about first off is I was very fortunate. My entire third year of college was in Rome, Italy, and the first place I went to was Pompeii. And when I was walking up the entrance to Pompeii, they had an exhibit at that time where they had a Roman soldier that had been on guard duty there and he had not been relieved, so he just stayed on duty and he died. And I think that Mark Twain, well, I know he came. Mark Twain came 100 years before me, and he saw the same soldier. The soldier had that anguished look. You could see his teeth. It was a very powerful experience. And what I'd like to start off with is I'd like you to read what Mark Twain said about the soldier. But perhaps the most poetic thing Pompeii has yielded to modern research was that grand figure of a Roman soldier, clad in complete armor, who, true to his duty, true to his proud name of a soldier of Rome, and full of the stern courage which had given to that name its glory, stood to his post by the city gate, erect and unflinching till the hell that raged around him burned out the dauntless spirit it could not conquer. We never read of Pompeii, but we think of that soldier. We cannot write of Pompeii without the natural impulse to grant to him the mention he so well deserves. Let us remember that he was a soldier, not a policeman, and so praise him. Being a soldier, he stayed because the warrior instinct forbade him to fly. Had he been a policeman, he would have stayed also because he would have been asleep. I got my first scholarly presentation on Bodie, California. It's a documentary I did on the old West ghost town up in California. And for me, I see a lot of similarities because that town was basically, the miners just left most of it there. And you go to Bodie and you get to see how these people lived. And when I look at Bodie and Pompeii, I see a lot of similarities. And so in the essence of Bodie, Pompeii, and in the footsteps of Mark Twain, I'd like to say the real question for me, when I look at these towns, is who were these people? And in doing that, I found that it is, there's a lot of similarities between the two, the citizens in both places. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the history of it. I'm going to give you a basic history of it. We're going to talk about the eruption because that's been kind of an interesting situation. Then we're going to take a tour with Google Earth of Pompeii itself. And then we have some photographs in that. So we'll get started here. The location. Pompeii is located a little bit back off the coast on an escarpment, which is a raised piece of land right by the river Sarno, which is no longer there because the eruption filled it in. It is a place that was a trading center. It was kind of like the hub center there as far as the local towns were concerned. This is where everybody kind of went to. It wasn't really the resort town. Some people say that. The resort town, I think, was Herculaneum. That was a little further up the coast. It was, first, the Oscans had it, and the Greeks came in and took it away from them. And then it looks like the Etruscans had it. And then about 400 BC, the Samnites came in and took it away from the Etruscans. And basically they had it, and in 190 BC they became a colony of Rome. They sent soldiers up to Rome. And what they did, they made a mistake in 98 BC. They turned around and they revolted against Rome. And when they did that, Rome came down with General Sulla and they just basically conquered them. And what General Sulla did, is he came in and he had 4,000 legionnaires that were retiring. So he just took a lot of the property for all the people that were against Rome. He took it away from them and he gave it to the Roman soldiers. And those soldiers became known as the colonists. And this is the first influence of when the Romans come into that. And that is in 80, 90 BC, roughly about that. It's a very fertile area. It is great crops. It is a lot of the exports are onion, wine, and garum, which was a fermented fish oil. It's interesting, today I was talking to a guy that had a pizza place, and they're doing great business. And I said, why are you doing so well? He says, we're getting our tomatoes from Pompeii. So it's a very rich, fertile area. The biggest event between the Romans taking over and the eruption, and it's very important, is the 62 AD earthquake that was said to have gone on for 3 days. It really destroyed a great deal of the city. And the issue was we had much more social readjustment because we had a large merchant class of people that were growing and coming into their, were developing their businesses and their crafts, and they were getting financially more powerful. And then we had this wealthy class of people that didn't have enough money to fix their villas. And they were selling their villas off. They couldn't figure out how to make money. So between the earthquake and Vesuvius, we have this amazing change in the social structure and economics of, there's a social unrest happening. The eruption, I want to talk a little bit about that because there's two different effects here. One, the effect in Herculaneum, which is up the coast, was far different than what we saw in Pompeii. Basically about 12 o'clock in the morning, or 12 o'clock noon, they had the mountain. It wasn't a mountain. They didn't know it was a volcano. It was just a mountain. And really, literally, the top of the mountain just blew straight up. And immediately after that, it was pretty terrifying. Most of the people got out of Pompeii. Most of them got out of Herculaneum. And we don't really know. There's probably more. There was a lot of villas in the area there. We don't know what happened with that. There's probably a lot more underneath all of this that we haven't found. It was, what happened in Pompeii was that within about 3 or 4 hours, this real fine ash started to fall into, on the city, and the people were breathing in this ash. It was coating their lungs, and they suffocated. It was kind of a slow, painful death. What was interesting about it is, as the ash packed on top of them, their bodies were actually covered with the ash, and they came in and they took plaster of Paris, and after the tissue had decayed and the cloth had gone away, they were able to come in there and basically put plaster of Paris, and they would get these forms of the people in their last, where they had died. Herculaneum was far different, because what happened in Herculaneum is 12 hours after the eruption, they were still alive, when all of a sudden this pyroclastic flow of rock, dirt, ash just came roaring down the mountain, 70 miles an hour, anywhere from 400 to 1,300 degrees, and it killed the people that were left in Herculaneum in an instant. They didn't even know it hit them, basically. So we're going to take a look at basically those two effects. The sixth surge would cover Pompeii's 160 acres. Our campus here at COC is 153, so Pompeii is roughly the size of our campus here. And then finally, what was really interesting to me is that there was a relief effort put together by the Emperor Titus. And Titus, for those that was known as a person that had committed genocide really in Jerusalem, But what he did when Pompeii erupted is that he took money out of his own private account, he went down to Campania, and he actually organized a relief effort. That is the only time in Roman history that I've heard of a relief effort put together, because the Romans were stoic, and that was not something that you would basically, it was not something that people would think of. It was like, that's your lot, you're going to have to accept that. Now, here we go. You can kind of see right here, this is the ash. Right there, you can see here's Vesuvius, Herculaneum here, got a little bit of ash, and there's Pompeii. This is a victim in Pompeii. You can see the plaster cast, and you can see the person there trying to, struggling to breathe. Here's another very famous one of a victim, I guess you would say, in Pompeii. If we look at the victims in Herculaneum, this was a soldier that was outside, and he was hit by that flow, and it incinerated his body in an instant. The next picture I want to show you is kind of interesting, because those are not real bodies. Those are fiberglass replicas of what they found in the boathouse in Herculaneum. What is interesting about this is in Pompeii, we had a basement, and we had the same basic setup. In this boathouse, the wealthy individuals were in one corner, the slaves were in the other. Same thing in Pompeii. We had the wealthy in one corner, and the slaves were in another corner. Okay, so what I like to take now, this is Vesuvius, 2,000 feet across, 1,000 feet down. We're going to swing right out here. You can see Herculaneum. See how deep that is there? Because it was covered with so much ash. We're going to bring this out a little bit here, and we're going to see the shoreline. That shoreline was created by the eruption. And from here, we're going to swing all the way down so you can see where Pompeii was. It was about 6 miles south of Vesuvius. And we're going to tilt up here just in a second. You can see Vesuvius there. And this is the 160 acres. There's about 30% of this town is still covered. And they've been excavating. This is really the first archaeology site ever, and they're still excavating it. They actually, last week, they found, they excavated a house and found 2 women and 3 children in it. From here, the entrance is Porta Marina. And this is the main entrance by the main ticket office. You go up here, and you see the wall right up here. This wall right here is the side of the basilica. Now, the basilica is a very interesting building, because this is where all the litigation took place. This is where the Duumvirs, which were the 2 elected officials, would conduct their business. And they were the ones that would represent Pompeii and Rome, and these were the highest magistrates in the city. They would handle the legal differences. They also had a little jail cell there that they found 2 people that had been chained there. And it was also kind of a criminal court as well. A lot of contracts and things like that were negotiated here. It was destroyed in the earthquake, and this really is what they found when they excavated it. They'd come in and they'd take the tops off. They hadn't repaired it, and in 17 years, it had just basically had stayed like that. From here, we're going to swing over. See, we're going over the Forum, and we're going to look at these 3 buildings. They're very important, and they are the municipal buildings, basically where the bureaucracy worked. And they had 2 elected officials in there. They were like junior magistrates. They called them aedles, basically. And what they did was to make sure the water was running and the taxes were collected, and they would take care of the city responsibilities. They are, most people don't realize that was really an important part of the city. The thing that was interesting is that if you wanted to be elected as a Duumvir or an aedile, what you did was, what did you do for the Pompeii? Did you have gladiator games? Did you, what did you build? And that was kind of the way people got into their politics. From here, we're going to swing back a little bit, and this is, I think, the most interesting building in all of Pompeii, right here. This is the Eumachia Building. And what makes it so interesting is it was built by the high priestess Eumachia. Women had absolutely no standing in this society. And this woman went and she took her private funds and she built this enormous building here. We're not quite sure what it is, except we think it's tied to the people that were dyeing cloth. What is interesting about it is her statue is right back here in the back. And that was the guild of the cloth dyers, they erected this statue to her. And the city went out and bought her, when she passed away, they bought her a cemetery plot, and she was very revered in the society. From here, we're going to go, and these two buildings right here basically are temples. The first one here is a temple to the deity of Vespasian. He'd been the emperor just before Titus. He was the father of Titus. And what that was basically was for a way of establishing bond or binding Pompeii to Rome. And so that was that temple there. Next to it, this one here was unfinished. It was the Temple of the Lares. Religion at this time is not like what we think of religion today. If you went to a temple, it was basically to give offerings, like a civic duty, but that was basically for the protection of Rome, make sure that Rome was, you were giving offerings for the protection of Rome. It wasn't this connection with a God or a higher power. You can see when Christianity comes along, they're going to change that, and it's going to really be, this form of governance with religion is going to be challenged. Just above this, we're going to look here at the fish market. This was like a big shopping center. We know what it was. It was basically a lot of activity every day with that. From here, we're going to cross the Forum, and we're going to see one temple right here. That's a temple of Jupiter, and this is the temple of Apollo. So in the Forum, the center of this city, we see we've got 4 religious buildings. And it was a way of basically binding Pompeii to Rome. And it was more of a, like I said, it was more of a duty a citizen would have. From here, we're going to jump over. Here's a picture of Jupiter, and this is of Apollo. We're going to go from here. I'm going to take just a sidestep here. We know they had a school. We don't know where it is. There is one painting of some boys sitting at a table with wax tablets, and the teacher is flogging one of the students. So they had education. But we don't know where it was. It is interesting, when we look at this, graffiti was everywhere in Pompeii. And it was just a way of, I want to share some of the graffiti that we said. It was a way for politics to get their name out, things like that. But some of the graffiti, most of it was quite vulgar. For example, was, Virgula to Teritas, you're a dirty old man. Augie loves Altotinius. Altamitas got me pregnant. Paris was here, and Saminus to Cornelius, go hang yourself. So I kind of like that. Those are, but most of the, we actually have an individual did his thesis on the graffiti that he was able to pick up in Pompeii. From here, we're going to go to the theaters. There are 2 theaters. One were built by the Samnites, the smaller one of 1,000 recitals. The other one is the larger one. What is interesting about this is you'll notice here we've got 2 areas down on the bottom. This was for the wealthy, elite men. They would sit there. And then it would be broken up. You would have freedmen and citizens would have their seats, and above that you'd have the slaves and women on both of this. What is interesting is I've taken our students here. I've stood right there. I've put my students up at the top, and they can hear me perfectly. The acoustics are amazing. This was covered. These were donated by people that were trying to create favor and get a political position or get elected to a Doomver or a Nadel. Right here we have the gladiator barracks. There's some controversy over this because when they found it, they found a lot of gladiator armor. They found 18 men, and they found 1 wealthy woman. And so it was always thought that it was a gladiator barrack. But the reality was there's a new research has come out and said, no, it's too nice. The art was too good. And it was basically, it couldn't have been that. I kind of think, it's my opinion, that what you had here was probably this was a market or something. And then maybe after the earthquake, then they put the gladiators there. Maybe you did both. From here, we're going to go to where the youth used to hang out. It was like a YMCA. And you'll see in the middle there, that rectangle, that is a wading pool. And so this is where the youth would go in the afternoon, and they would play games and do things like that. You would not go to the ocean and bathe at the ocean because that's King Neptune's realm, and you don't want to get them upset, so they would go here, and this is where they would be. If we go, this is a picture of that from the side. We're going to go right next door to this, to one of the most amazing pieces of structures in Pompeii, and this is the arena. You can see clearly here those three levels here. Here's where the wealthy men would sit. Then right there you can see that break. This is where the freedmen and the citizens would sit. Then above that would be for the women and the slaves. Basically, athletic contests, they'd have this. They'd have gladiator fights. They would have gladiator fight beasts and all those types of things. We don't know too much about that, except we do have some graffiti I want to share with you. The chief, a Neronian, fought 13-110. Heronius, freedman, fought 18, was killed. Girl's heartthrob, Solidas, fought 3, won 3. Creanus fought 7, won 5, and was spared. That was just graffiti. That's about all we have to work with on the gladiator fights. If you, we're going to take a look here, move around just a little bit here. We're going to see the arena was built into the side of a mountain. And there was a tunnel that ran all the way around through there. And we're going to take I'll show you a quick picture of that. This is the tunnel, this is the tunnel that goes from, this is the tunnel that goes, this is not the tunnel. This is the tunnel that goes all the way around the arena. This is so the wealthy could leave the arena and not rub shoulders with the freedmen and the citizens. We're going to take a look here at a bakery. We're going to jump, and we're going down here. You really can't see it from this picture here, but right here is a bakery. And this is where they would put the grain into the top here. They would have like a donkey would go around in a circle. The grain would get crushed into a flour. There was a problem with this, though. Those little bits of rock would get into the bread, and this is why the molars of the people that lived in Pompeii were worn down, we think. From here, we're going to go to the Taverna. A Taverna basically was a place where you could get a hot meal. It was open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This was not for the wealthy. The wealthy all ate at home. This was for the poor. So unlike our society, it would be the poor that would be going to the Taverna. Above this, we would see that we would have possibly the apartment of the person that was owned it, or even a prostitute might be working from there. This is a Taverna. You can see the spots. This is a laundry urine bath. Urine was collected. It was deposited into, it was taxed, and people would, they'd throw the dirty clothes in there, and people would walk on that all day. And what it would do is it remove the grease and the stains from it. Then it would be pressed, or before it was pressed, it would be rinsed in clean water, and then it would be pressed. From here, we're going to go and, got to go back one more. From here, we're going to go over to the forum baths. There were four baths in Pompeii. This is the one by the forum. And it is probably the nicest one. What is interesting in this is the hot room. There were 3 rooms. There were hot, medium, and kind of cold. The doctors told people that had open wounds, don't go into the bathtub there because you would get an infection. But if you look here closely, what you'll see are these ribs, and those were put into the ceiling so that the water would drip down to the side. This is where these cubbies holes here were where they put their togas, and above that you'd have your artwork. Very nice. This was a socialist place. People would go into the baths. They would be, everybody, in the afternoon, everyone would get naked. They would go and talk business, be social contacts. It was really kind of an interesting place. Now, this is the Lupanara, which is a brothel. And I have a little story with this. It had been closed for years, and I finally got to see it. And I was about a block away because it had a huge line. And when I got there, I got into a tour group. I was in the middle of this tour group, and we're getting closer and closer. It took about a half hour to get up to the door. And I realized that everybody in this tour group is a woman my age and older. So I started talking to one of them, and she says, "I'm Sister Mary Agatha. And this is the Mother Superior." 12 years of Catholic education. So if you go into this room, I'm going to explain the room. You have these cribs, very small rooms, probably just a cloth to cover it. And up on top of that, you see basically the menu of services provided. These are the cribs, basically, a prostitute's crib. But as we're going through the Lupanara, the nuns were real quiet. And I don't want to look up. And then one of them said, "Sister, look at this." And they all started to laugh. And I was able to laugh then too. I was able to look up. So, but most of the prostitution, this is the only brothel we have in Pompeii. Most of the prostitution was done in these little cribs down side roads. You just kind of walked into the crib, and it was basically just the prostitute was registered, had to pay a tax. Once you got on the register as a prostitute, you were there for life. If it was a woman, you always had to wear your hair long. You had to wear a man's toga. It was a pretty hard life. Most of course, the women here were all slaves. Here's some of the bedroom erotica that we found there. There's some more of it. This is a wind chime. It's meant to ward off evil spirits. And basically what that is it's like a good luck charm almost. You can see it's a phallus symbol there. And we see this all over Rome and Pompeii and Herculaneum. These are phallus symbols that are basically like horseshoes, good luck. When they came into, Charles III started to excavate out and they started finding all this thing, he immediately stopped the excavation and he went and he took all of these things and he put it in the Gabinetto Segreto, which is the secret cabinet. And only people that were of high moral quality and character could go see it. Which to me, I can't understand why someone with high moral character would be interested in seeing this. It is open, it's at the Naples Museum. Anybody can go there. Everybody knows it's there. Everybody knows what's in it. But the Italians, this is what I love about them, they still keep it. It's a secret cabinet. We're going to take a look here. Remember I mentioned General Sulla at the beginning? He gave his nephew this house, the House of the Faun. And it's the best house. This is the entryway here. This is what the entryway looked at the time of Rome. You can see how elegant that was. In the middle of it is an amazing, just an absolute amazing fresco. Not fresco, I'm sorry, Professor McCaffrey. It is a mosaic, and it's Darius and Alexander the Great. It's a must-see if you go there. I want to take one quick look here at basically the intersection and the roads, and I want to take a look also at the sewer system, because these were very important construction efforts, and the water system. I don't understand why, if you look at the roads here in Pompeii, and if we compare them to Herculaneum, they're different. You notice we've got these little things you walk across, and it doesn't look like, I'm going to show this to you, and we can compare this. You can see the roads on the top there are from Pompeii. Look how they're, I think it's because it was a really commercial center. You've got a lot of, see these ruts from the wagons right there? These are all Pompeii roads. You see you have to walk across there. And these are Herculaneum. See how nice those are, those roads? I'm not sure why that is, but it seems like Herculaneum, they fixed the roads, or there wasn't that much of a commercial activity going on. The sewer line in Pompeii was a cistern system. They didn't really have a sewer system. It just kind of, you just had like a septic tank around the homes, and that's a line. But this is Herculaneum. This is the sewer system right here. It's about 6 feet tall. They've got, and this is where they're excavating all kinds of fecal matter to turn out what the diet was. The diet was excellent in Pompeii. Plenty of fruits, vegetables. They had, even the slaves, everybody ate very well there. The drinking fountain, what I wanted to show this to you is if you look here, you'll see how this is worn. It's been worn down from hundreds of years of people putting their hand there to get a drink of water. We're going to go here. This is the most, I'm going to end on this real quickly. This is what is known as a fugitive. Most people that go to Pompeii, they don't get to see this, but I think this has the most impact. It's this little building right here. And basically what it is, it was a family that left a little too late. And it's called the Fugitives right there. And we can see their cast where they fell. it looks like it was a family, children, parents, young adults, and that's what the most powerful part of Pompeii for me. When Mark Twain left Pompeii and he was headed back towards Naples, he's always kind of a fun, melancholy. He's always kind of a fun writer, but he was melancholy. He was saddened, and what he was saddened about is he said, his thought was, what are they going to say about us 20 centuries after today? As I'm looking back at these famous people and them, what are they going to say about us? And that's kind of the answer to the whole question, I think, of, who were these people? Because when we ask that question, we're really saying, who are we? So, thank you very much. Okay, it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Professore Michael McCaffrey. He has been an inspiration to me. His enthusiasm and commitment to our study abroad program, of which we've got flyers, we're going again in June, has inspires me to be a better teacher. So I'd like to bring up Professor McCaffrey. Thanks.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. Ordinarily, I would add to my greeting a customary warm welcome, but I'm not sure that's entirely applicable tonight. So in the interest of brevity, we shall continue. Let me begin with something familiar and dear to me, namely an image. On screen is the famous work of the American pop artist Jasper Johns. And Johns, shortly after he painted the picture that you see here, was being interviewed by an art critic. And he had to field a question that artists often get asked. And the critic asked Johns, which pictures have influenced you in your own career? And in his answer, I think Johns is both very direct but also very revealing. When he responds, every picture I ever looked at. Every picture I ever looked at. Now, to be sure, Johns understood the questioner really meant which fine art pictures have influenced you. So which of those important paintings, the ones in the fancy frames, which occupy the walls of the famous art museums in the world, which one of those pictures has influenced you? But Johns calls here for an expansive view of art, to include contemporary popular cultural symbols and forms as well, to consider those as being equal as pictures and images to the traditional fine art that you see in those museums. And in so doing, he advocates for a focus upon popular symbols such as the flag, or another favorite subject of John's, everyday utilitarian objects like alphabets and numbers. And in this way, he echoes the kind of spirit of his fellow pop artists who also celebrate popular symbols from mass culture, such as Andy Warhol's famous Brillo box images, which celebrate, celebrate the art of commercial packaging and signage, and the work of Roy Lichtenstein that kind of riffs on or mimics the look of pulp comic book ephemera. Now, this is probably going to age some of us in the room, yours truly included, but almost 60 years have passed since Johns painted that famous image of the American flag. And of course, in that time, this idea that popular culture is full of images. It's an image-based society that we live in as modern people. That, of course, has only gained pace. So to try and illustrate what I think Johns was talking about, and indeed to tie it in to this wider discussion of how art operated throughout different stratas of Pompeian society, I'd like you to consider just the last hour of your life. Think about, on your way here this evening, all the ways in which pictures, in which images have informed and enhanced and made easier your experience. So perhaps you called up a route map system like Waze or Google Maps to map the way here this evening. And you get this nice graphic display, complete, of course, with a pretty accurate ETA. Or, as you drove here, perhaps on your dash, you had a GPS device which transported you as if you were moving through actual space and time. Indeed, the whole while, there in the center of your steering wheel was the logo, the brand of your car staring back at you. Or maybe you decided just to dispense with the whole rigmarole of driving here yourself and order up someone who would pick you up curbside in a Toyota Corolla and drop you off right here at the campus. And we don't even have to stop there. Think about the signage that then guided you to this building and indeed all the way to your very seat. As Johns understands it, pictures are everywhere. And this is the hallmark not only of our society and us as modern people, it's also the hallmark of art in ancient Pompeian society, who, like us, consider themselves to be modern. So let me begin with a classic image of Pompeii. There you see much of the site, and of course you see it in the context of the ominous outline of Vesuvius there in the background. And most shots of Pompeii, of course, capture the city set against the mountaintop of the volcano, because, of course, that great event, that cataclysmic eruption that my colleague so completely described a few seconds ago, is, of course, the defining feature of ancient Pompeian history. But what's really important about Pompeii is not in the picture. If you were to turn around 180 degrees, behind you right here is the beautiful waters of the Mediterranean Sea. To your left would be the Sorrento Peninsula, and then out there in the Bay of Naples, you would see the outline of the beautiful island of Capri. No, Pompeii was a port town. It was built to accept and to thrive on the trade that flowed into Italy from all four corners of the Mediterranean basin. It was, in fact, the main import-export center of the whole southern Roman region of Campania, which stretched from just north of Naples all the way down into the boot heel of Italy. As a result, if you were walking on a typical Pompeian street or thoroughfare like this, you would see bustling crowds. You would hear different languages being spoken. It was a polyglot. And different people from places as far afield as North Africa, Asia Minor, Greece, Spain, and so forth. And these people, traders, merchants, sailors, brought with them, of course, a whole range of exotic goods and capital wealth as well. And this really thrives, this really drives the local economy of Pompeii. One way in which it manifests itself is in a thriving retail and commercial sector. So here we are on one of the main commercial thoroughfares in Pompeii, which is Via dell'Abbondanza, which literally translates, believe it or not, as Street of the Abundances. And as far as the eye can see here, stretching away in the distance, these are all storefronts that you can see. And they would be selling the various exotic goods which would accompany these traders from the far reaches of the Mediterranean basin. Things such as expensive or rare silks, things such as metal goods, trinkets, ornaments, jewelry, and indeed exotic foodstuffs which weren't native to southern Italy. If we actually close in on one of these storefronts, you can see how images here, as they would be in a modern-day commercial building, images are used to advertise the kind of services or the kind of sales which would go on within the establishment beyond. So in these images here, on the very top, and indeed also on the right-hand side, you see actually the image of Venus there at the top. And Venus, while we of course associate her with being the goddess of love and beauty and those kind of things, was also the deity of threads. And so here she kind of looks favorably upon, if you look below there, a series of 5 or 6 workers who are actually working with creating felt to be used in clothing. And indeed, you can think of Venus here, as she looks approvingly down upon their work, as kind of adding a kind of authority to this store. She certifies in a way that these are quality goods that you're going to receive from this store, and probably also exceptional service. She is performing the Roman equivalent of a 5-star Yelp review. And also, art flourishes in other places too, aside from just the commercial sector of the city itself. For instance, the bathhouse, which my colleague alluded to earlier, he is one of the other houses in town, the Stabian Baths, would be an important ritualistic social function for Romans to attend. At the end of a long day, after working hard at the office, you would come to the bathhouse to relax and unwind. It was like a modern-day spa. But it was also a kind of informal place for business to take place, and art plays a role here in that too, as you can see. But it's really in its domestic context that we see the full flourishing of Pompeian art, and we see how it spreads throughout all sectors of society. For sure, art in Roman times was used in traditional ways to support and glorify the ruling classes and the elites. But what's unique about it is the way in which it also appears in abundance in ordinary domestic settings, such as the Roman villa or the Roman house. And perhaps the most famous of these Roman villas on screen is the house of the Vetti. So here we are at the Faustus, or the entranceway to their villa. And the Vetti brothers, it's an interesting backstory. We have a lot of records, census records, and so forth, which gives us a pretty nice biography of these brothers. They were once slaves. They became freedmen. When they achieved the freedom, they went on to have an illustrious career in business, so they took advantage of the kind of trade and commerce passing through Pompeii, and they built up a sizable fortune. And with that fortune, were able to buy themselves the biggest house, really, in Pompeii. And art plays a crucial role here as we enter their house in setting up a demarcation between the private spaces of their residence and the public spaces. Because like the baths, the house, the domestic space, was also an appropriate setting to do business. So as you pass into the entranceway here, up on the center portion of the screen, you'll see some images painted kind of on the doorpost of the entryway. And if we close in, it's hard not to be, let's say, fixated by the endowment of this particular figure, but he's more than just an erotic symbol. This is the figure, the minor god, actually a relation of Bacchus that we're going to see later on. This is the minor god of Priapus. And aside from his obvious use as a symbol of fertility, Priapus is so much more. And he was actually a common thing to feature on the entranceway to a Roman villa. In addition to being a figure of fertility, Priapus was also a god of the harvest, of bounties, of fruits and vegetables. And that's referenced here by the basket of sumptuous fruits, the fresh produce, which is in the basket at his feet. And that basket serves as a metaphor for the abundance of the Vetti household. A rich household, they of course enjoyed the best trappings of Pompeian life. But he's also acting here like a sentry figure. So he announces to the visitor, he wards off people who might be avaristic or might be envious of the success of the Vettis. And he sets out, in a sense, the social contract that one should conduct oneself by inside their household. Finally, in a kind of tongue-in-cheek gesture, you'll notice it's a little bit flaked off, but he weighs that enormous member against a bag of gold coins. So the kind of tongue-in-cheek joke I guess the Vetti are having is that they're worth their weight in gold as businessmen. Anyway, as we enter in there, you probably saw in the previous shot, one of the first areas you would encounter, indeed an appropriate place to conduct business in the Roman household, was the atrium. And I have to take a few minutes, a little off script here, to mention, if you're ever in Italy in a place like Florence or Rome in the heat of summer, and it's pretty oppressively hot, you don't have to go to ancient buildings to experience this, but the atrium is this wonderful, innovative design feature of Italian buildings. Air conditioning in the modern Italian city is not standard. One of the ways in which, taking from the ancients, the Italian architectural style creates a kind of internalized air-conditioned system is through the use of atriums. This open air area, you can see obviously the sky up above, vents hot air out and creates a circulatory flow of cool air coming in from the doorway. The doorway that we just passed through faces the Mediterranean Sea, so you can imagine the cooling breezes which you would be able to kind of engineer or pass through this space. It's remarkably effective. I recommend it to you if you're just walking by a building containing a courtyard or atrium within. But the atrium, as a place, a scene to conduct business, is of course replete with many great artworks. You can see them throughout the walls that you see here on screen. And that continues on to the interior of the very house. On the inside spaces of the house, in the more domestic quarters of the house, you see art proliferate there too. And indeed, some of this art is so sophisticated, it's so good at conjuring up an illusion of three-dimensionality that an archaeologist working on the Pompeian excavation about 150 years ago, a German archaeologist by the name of Wolfgang Mau, decided that this required a complete recalibration of Western art history. We had gone into this period thinking that the origins of art history were in the Italian Renaissance circa 1400 or so. But with the discovery of these great paintings in Pompeii, which predate the Renaissance by some 1400 years, we had to kind of recalibrate and rethink maybe the origin point for the course of Western art history. Now, Mao was so convinced that this was a game changer that he decided to codify the different painting styles that he saw in Pompeian villas, such as the Veri House. The first of these codifications, he simply calls first style wall painting, involves the use of paint to create what looks like sumptuous surfaces on the drab walls of the interior of a Roman villa. One of the consequences of Roman construction, while it was a quantum leap above what anyone else in the Mediterranean enjoyed, Roman masonry construction yielded rooms that were featureless, they were kind of drab and gray, and typically had very, very few windows. As a result, they were quite claustrophobic. The typical Roman family couldn't afford to face those walls with expensive stones. So instead of trying to acquire marble and travertine, they used what we would call faux finishing techniques to approximate the look of, say, a marbleized texture on the wall. The trouble with first-style wall painting was that it ultimately, therefore, reinforced the flatness of the wall and its enclosing character. So enter second-style Pompeian wall painting that explodes that flatness. Instead, the room is treated as if it's full of windows, illusionistically painted onto the wall surfaces of the room so that they appear to open out into these grand, deep, exotic vistas. And this is where we think we have the origin point for the tale and narrative of how it is that Western pictorial illusionism develops. Let me head back into that previous room we're looking at a few slides ago and look specifically at that panel on the far right-hand side, which I've highlighted or blown up for you here on the right-hand portion of the screen. This is very close in style to how we would create perspective in our drawings and paintings today. Roman perspective, though, didn't use vanishing points, but it did use the crucial kind of visual cue that the eye uses to perceive three-dimensional space on a flat two-dimensional surface, namely receding diagonal edges. And you can see that in the architectural forms on the right, in which they sharply go in diagonals that recede towards what would be, or presumed to be, vanishing points in our system. And it closely approximates what happens in actual Renaissance paintings from circa 1427 or so. Here, you'll notice how the architecture on the right-hand side of the image recedes along diagonal lines too. The actual painting we're looking at a fragment there of, you can see it on the right-hand side, is considered by historians to be maybe one of the first illusionistic paintings in the history of Western art. In this, the artist Masaccio creates for the first time the fully fledged, believable creation of illusion of a three-dimensional event occurring on a flat two-dimensional surface. And he does so in numerous ways. The remarkable thing is the things which were innovative for Masaccio also appear in Pompeian paintings from 1400 years earlier. Number one, and most obviously, most commonly, the use of linear perspective. So those diagonal lines on the building on the right-hand side converge upon the central figure in the story, which of course is the figure of Christ. Number two, the figures themselves. First off, notice how the faces are all individualized. And also notice how there are different expressions on those faces. They emote a different expression to you, the viewer. Secondly, they're lit by a single strong light source, creating what we call a chiaroscuro lighting system, literally from the Italian words light, dark. And that high contrast lighting yields a kind of solid sculptural figure as a result. Finally, and somewhat subtly, you'll notice that not everyone stands facing out. Some people do, but some people stand perpendicular, facing to the side. And indeed, one figure stands like us, looking into the picture too. And that kind of encircling of space helps to create an illusion as well. And then lastly, and I think most compellingly, the picture is rendered or treated as if it's a cinematic image. The same figure actually appears 3 separate times. This is the figure of St. Peter, who in the biblical narrative is constructed by Christ to pay the tax collector by going over to the lake, wherein he'll find a fish, of course, with gold coins in its mouth. And you'll notice that it's the same figure running 3 times through the picture as well. To give him his due, by the way, the tax collector gets in there twice if you're paying close attention. And these things, as I mentioned, well, innovations of the Renaissance era in Florence, Italy, 600 odd years ago, were uncovered by Mao in the villas of Pompeii and required us to recalibrate our thinking about the origins of Western art history. And we're going to make a little trip here outside of the city walls to visit an important and large, as you can see, suburban villa situated outside the actual jurisdictions of Pompeii itself. And that situation outside of town is probably significant. The villa was built there because, well, frankly, a lot of interesting things probably happened here. The Roman state would be somewhat tolerant of obscure cult religions, which you think were practiced in this house, as long as those religions didn't, of course, threaten to upset the official state religion or indeed the state itself. Hence the name, the Villa of the Mysteries. We think some pretty saucy things went on in here, but we're not entirely sure what they might have been. Nevertheless, like the House of the Veti, the Villa of the Mysteries contains all of the different styles of Pompeian wall painting and reveal, therefore, again, the origins of the history of art as being much earlier than we perhaps thought they were. And one mural in particular is worth mentioning here exclusively. I think it's one of the great paintings in art history and indeed contains a scene within it which I think is the best picture from ancient times. It's called the Dionysiac Mystery Frieze. We think the central cult deity around which the household was organized was the figure of Bacchus or Dionysus, depending on your preference. The god, of course, of wine and merriment, but also a god of youth and beauty as well. One thing to note here as we go in and expand our view of the scene, on the back wall there, you'll notice there's a fairly significant loss in the fresco, and it's worth pointing out here a little bit about the fresco process. Hopefully, as you came in here this evening to the presentation, you saw our fresco artist executing some fresco panels in the lobby. If you didn't, on the way out, he will have probably finished most of those panels, and you'll be able to see an actual fresco out there in the lobby on the left as you leave. Either way, the fresco process is revealed here by these kind of losses. So these sections of the actual painting that flaked off, they reveal the masonry structures of the wall behind, but they actually expose, it comes up here as a kind of gray outline, they expose the thick layer of plaster which was necessary for creating fresco painting. Literally meaning freshness in Italian, fresco painting was a very unique medium which is essential to the Romans and indeed to the Renaissance artists who had all of those big churches to fill with paintings. And fresco painting would involve the use of a watery paint painted on top of fresh, wet limestone plaster. The idea being that the paint, instead of being on the wall, impregnated the plaster and dried into the wall. It became an architectural, if you like, medium. The upside to fresco painting is, number one, it's a quick medium. You have to work quickly. Number two, it's cheap. But the big downside is it's full of fallibility. If you screw up, if you get something wrong, you got to scratch it off and start again. So it's a great medium to decorate masonry surfaces or large rooms like this, which is a formal dining room within the Villa of the Mysteries. If we close in, there's the full narrative shown on its three separate walls, from top to bottom, the left wall, the back wall, and indeed the right wall, as we were just looking at it in the previous slide. It's a big narrative. It contains over 20 figures, and in order to, if you like, thread together the various parts of the story, the artisan or artisans that painted it had to resort to some pretty significant innovations to achieve their effects. Or here, if you prefer, here it is strung out as a single continuous narrative. And I like this view because it gives you some idea of how, like a script, the Roman painting is read from left to right. And also how, and I mean this in all sincerity, like a modern-day comic book, the narrative is divided up into kind of rectangular sections as well. We'll start there on the left and move our way through the right and describe the various parts which make up the overall fresco. First of all, though, let's look at a few things which relate to the style and indeed the innovations of Renaissance painting from Florence, such as the Masaccio image that we just looked at. For instance, right away, you can notice that the faces are expressive and individualized. Secondly, and I've highlighted it here with that red oval, architecture is used to create the illusion of space on the surface of the wall. Here, there's a receding, shallow, horizontal plane indicated by the diagonals of various features sitting on it, which is deep enough to occupy the figures which stand there in front of us. A final thing they use here is something known to the Greek artists as megalographia. So they paint those figures at life size, so they also relate to us, to the viewer, in a very direct way too. And then finally, the idea of a chiaroscuro light. So the figures are lit strongly so that they have a sculptural solidity and a kind of bulky presence, a believable kind of presence within the mural itself. So this is the first scene from the frieze, and you'll notice how, in order to kind of propel the narrative to the right, the first figure, who we think is the mother of the initiate, the person who's about to undergo some kind of process here in this painting, the mother faces to the left. She kind of bookends the narrative and helps to propel it forward. Next to her is probably her daughter. This is the initiate. We think she's maybe going to be involved in some kind of mysterious marriage rite with the god Bacchus himself. The servant girl next to her also moves left, helping to propel the narrative into the next scene, which looks like this. Now, notable here, just as we saw with Masaccio, notice how the figures don't all stand looking out at us. Some face to the side, some indeed, like us, face inwards. And indeed, the one curious figure on the right-hand side is the first appearance of a mythological figure that we see in the frieze. That's Silenus. He's the tutor, the kind of older, wiser tutor who teaches and guides the young god Dionysus. The women at the table there are preparing cloth, and that's the first indication that something ceremonial, something transformational is going to happen here in this storyline. So Silenus again directs us, propels us to the side, and into, I think, one of the most interesting parts of the narrative, which occurs in the corner of the room. The initiate, as we witnessed in the Masaccio painting, appears several times throughout this frieze, and here she makes her second appearance. Is she astonished? Is she scared? We don't know, but certainly her expression is unique. And in her emotional state, she unfurls her gown over her head, creating this large geometric shape, which once again propels us forward, but also around the corner, perpendicular onto the next wall. Silenus, as you can see there, makes a second appearance. And it's this panel here. Unfortunately, a portion of it is lost, but it's this panel here which I think, from a technical standpoint, is the most compelling image in the series. Here we have the first appearance by Bacchus himself. I actually like this shot here because for my purposes it reveals a little bit better a very tricky drawing problem which the artisan who painted this fresco seems to have solved in a highly successful way. If I can put on my teacher hat for a moment, the hardest thing the students in my drawing class, like a figure drawing class, encounter, the most difficult drawing problem, is how to draw the human body in perspective. And we call that problem, of course, the foreshortened body. Once my students have figured that problem out, they pretty much have all the tools they need to render anything they wish. But trying to make the body appear as if it moves through space is a very tricky thing to engineer. Here, Bacchus, and he always is, he's drunk. So he lolls out on the lap of his lover Ariadne. And if I can delve deep into my Scottish lexicon, if you want a good word for that, he's stocious. And in the process of lying back there, reclining in his drunken state, he moves not only diagonally across the picture plane, but he moves simultaneously from back to front, culminating in that projecting knee, which pokes out from underneath his robe. That is a classic, and indeed for my purposes, that would be an A+ project. That is a classic rendering of a foreshortened human limb. And the level of sophistication shown there, I think, belies or undercuts the age of the actual fresco we're looking at. It would fit perfectly well into a Renaissance painting, but here it is rendered almost a millennia and a half before that time period. But the initiation continues in the other corner of the room, where again, movement, dynamism, this whipping figure is used to compel the narrative again round the corner at a 90-degree angle onto the final wall. And there we see the initiate make a third, or indeed perhaps fourth appearance, as she appears to be getting readied for some kind of marriage. What I like about this particular scene here is you'll notice it's a little faded, but on the left-hand side there's a Cupid figure, a small angelic figure, and he's actually holding up a mirror. What I love is the ambiguity with which that mirror is facing either us or indeed the initiate herself. It's not easy to see, but I think the use of the mirror here toys around with the kind of idea of fictional realities and of the conjuring up of illusionistic spaces. And then finally, the bride or the initiate makes her final appearance enthroned, suggesting that the ritual is complete. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't take an opportunity to show up one of the most interesting quirks or coincidences in, I think, art history. If I go back to the Bacchus slide that you see on the upper left-hand portion, I've outlined for you that knee that I'm discussing as being an exemplary example of a foreshortened limb. The other picture I put up here is actually a painting from the 1640s. This is Velázquez, the great Spanish master, who would be considered one of the ultimate artists in being able to conjure up illusions. All you would have to do here is reverse one of the two images, and his work would be an exact facsimile of the earlier Pompeian work, specifically as it relates to the rendering of that foreshortened leg. The interesting irony here is, well, Velázquez died 200 years before Pompeii was excavated. He never saw this picture. But that coincidence, I think, underscores and indeed illuminates the sophistication of Roman art from the ancient world. So, in many ways, as it does in the modern world, art in the ruins of Pompeii manifests itself in all sorts of different parts of their society. It is ubiquitous. It appears frequently throughout the home. And also, I think most interestingly, it gets used as we would today as a form of commerce, to advertise, to brand, and so forth. So what I'd like you to think about, as I did at the beginning, asking you to consider your journey here, as you leave tonight, give some consideration to the way in which, as you wrap up your day, images inform your life. Images are educational, they're informational, and they enable. They are, in short, useful things. So if we were to say, paraphrase Jasper Johns' answer, if we were to pose the question, which pictures have ever influenced us? I would argue it's every one that we've ever looked at. Thank you, and good night.